I'm Keon.
And this is Inevitable, that podcast that's out of gas. Because this week we watched Out of Gas.
Written by Tim Minear.
Directed by David Solomon.
And aired on October 25th, 2002.
It's pretty rare that we just use the title of the episode as the intro. But I think it fits this week.
I do too, yeah. Because Serenity this week was indeed out of gas.
Which is weird to say because Serenity doesn't run on gas. In fact, what does Serenity run on? This episode surprisingly provides no clues that bring us any closer to answering that question.
Friendship or something like that.
It runs on fire.
This episode, I think, does answer that question actually in a more metaphorical sense, where it's like, you know, it runs on the combined strength of this crew, right?
I mean, in a very abstract, like, Serenity wouldn't be running if it weren't for this crew sense. Yes. But, like, does it literally run because of the crew, like, on the strength of the crew? No. If you use the actual definition of the word literally and not, like, the common vernacular and now probably accepted by the Oxford Dictionary definition of literally.
Yeah, it is. I think the Oxford English Dictionary itself actually does list, like, the two senses of literally, which one is literally and the other is figuratively. I'll verify that for the show notes, but I'm pretty sure it actually does. Out of gas.
Well, language is in flux, I guess.
Yeah, like Doctor Who Flux, coming soon to BBC.
Well, actually, the first episode will have aired by the time this goes out. Isn't that weird to think about?
Yeah, it's true. And we'll have watched it by that point because we're planning.
But we won't have podcasted on it yet.
No. Check out Trust Your Doctor, our Doctor Who podcast.
Yeah, I guess we'll just mention on here, just for anybody who is curious on following us for Doctor Who, we'll be, and we're going to talk about this in an episode on Trust Your Doctor, but we'll be podcasting along with the new season of Trust Your Doctor. I mean, Doctor Who, excuse me. That was a slip. But we'll probably be a week behind, so we'll be releasing like the episode on episode 1 of Flux the Sunday after this episode is released, which will also be the Sunday that episode 2 of Doctor Who airs.
Yeah, really just giving us time to let our thoughts marinate, let the episode sort of seep into their pores.
Watch it 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, no. Not that part.
No. But anyway, Firefly.
This is my favorite episode so far.
Yeah, I think it's probably my favorite episode too, and I actually think that that's a common opinion amongst fans. So much so that when I Googled, Firefly Out of Gas, looking actually for the IMDb page, it brought up like multiple articles / web pages about this episode alone, including a Screen Rant article that Keon and I were making jokes about pre-recording.
Mm-hmm. It's 10 hidden details you missed in the episode Out of Gas.
Except there's only 9 things on the list.
Yeah, there's only 9 things on the list. And, if, as Dylan said before we started recording, if you paid even the bare minimum of attention to this episode, you would have caught pretty much all of these.
Yeah, the only one... There are 2 you probably wouldn't have caught. One is the fact that these aired out of order because there's no way you would have known this by watching only this episode. And 2 is the fact that Zoe is absent from the episode because she's on her honeymoon with Lawrence Fishburne when they were filming this episode. Everything else on the list you could have like easily caught if you had paid like any attention to the episode at all.
Mm-hmm. And once again, let's give it up for the marriage between Gina Torres and Lawrence Fishburne. Lasted far longer than you might expect for a celebrity marriage.
I like how you say let's give it up for them again, implying that in the previous 7 episodes of this podcast, we've somehow at some point like made a like congratulatory comment towards those 2 for their marriage.
Oh no, I was just thinking because we were talking about it before the episode, but Yeah.
Okay, you mean again in the context of you and me, and not again in the context of the podcast.
Yeah, for once, like, I'm not letting the podcast, like, dissolve my, experience of the rest of the world and be so encased, like, I don't know, just in the podcast itself. Anyway, Joss Whedon calls this one of his favorite episodes too, or one of his favorite things that he's ever done.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that he didn't even write this episode. Like we said, it was written by Tim Minear. But I'm sure he had a hand in at least editing it or overseeing it before it went out. And it's like really tightly put together, and it uses the flashbacks, I think, in an interesting way. It's really easy to do an episode and use flashbacks and have it be really like by the numbers, straightforward, which is not in and of itself a bad thing. But I think it's to this episode's strength that it uses these flashbacks in an interesting way, where the flashbacks are even like, the flashbacks are in order, but we get flashbacks to two different time periods that are out of order with each other, and that kind of like reveals information about like the situation we're in now. I honestly thought when this episode opened with Mal like collapsing in the cargo bay, dying, running out of air, I legitimately thought the title sequence would start and then we'd get like 24 hours earlier to explain everything that went on. And we did get what happened, before, but we didn't get it like that explicitly.
Yeah, it's interesting. So just to kind of, I feel like we kind of need to preempt this before we go into the actual, events, where it's like you said, there's two different sets of flashbacks, and sort of one is informing how Mal got to where he is at the beginning, which he's bleeding out. And the other is sort of informing more the like thematic core of the story, and telling you in brief little snippets how the crew of Serenity, I almost call it the Firefly, which I guess it is. It's a Firefly class ship, but how the crew of Serenity came to be the crew of Serenity.
Right, and before we even get into the plot of the episode, can't believe I'm saying this, but the Screen Rant article did prompt me to check on something, and which I think is interesting and maybe perhaps bears noting, at least briefly. In the previous weeks, I've been mentioning, because Keon said that the Blu-ray doesn't include them, the intros to the episodes, the voiceover intros, and how in some weeks it's been Book and in some weeks it's been Mal. So I double-checked, of the episodes we've watched so far. This, in the airing order, this episode aired 5th, and this episode actually, in the order that it aired, would have been the first episode with Mal's voiceover. And the next 2 episodes that air are Shindig and Safe, both of which also feature Mal's voiceover. So it seems like for the first 4 episodes we had, or for the first 3 episodes really, because there was no voiceover in the actual pilot, Serenity. We had Book's voiceover, and then we've had Mal's. I guess we had Book's 4 times, and we have Mal's 3 times so far at this point. So it'll be interesting to see what voiceover is next, which would be, I think the episode that airs next, it airs in the airing order is post Safe, if I remember from when I looked earlier. But I'll double check that next week.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the list pulled up or anything. I can't keep them straight anyway.
And the only reason I want to mention it is because like this is such a Mal-centric episode, and Mal almost dies, and I think there is an interesting creative choice being made in switching from Book's narration, because Book's narration is presented from a very outside of the crew point of view, where he talks about the history of the universe, the Firefly universe specifically, but doesn't really go into like who the crew are. And so it's interesting then that this is the first voiceover from Mal, which I think I've mentioned before. Mal's voiceover has this whole extra segment that Books doesn't, about like how he's got a great crew and how he's got like a pilot and he's got a great engineer and they picked up a preacher and they've got a doctor and his sister who are on the run. Like he explains the whole crew in his voiceover, and it's interesting that the first time that happens is in this episode that kind of introduces how a lot of the crew got onto Serenity. I don't have anything more to say about it than that, just that it's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess having said all of that, we can kind of jump into the episode as a whole, having both explained the intro voiceover and also the kind of setup of the flashbacks.
So like we said, it opens with Mal bleeding out, and then we go into one of the two time periods, which is, I guess it's actually not a singular time period, but it's just like the order in which they assembled the crew, which obviously began with Mal and Zoe, who knew each other from the war. And you actually, I think at this point in the episode, you don't see anything. I'm pretty sure it's against a black screen, but you hear you hear the sort of sales pitch that you think is for Serenity, but you find out later it's not.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things to me about this episode, the most interesting single scenes in this episode, was the ending of the episode revealing that, like, that whole line is in a completely different context than what is presented to you at the beginning of the episode.
That to me is like the core of this episode, like where it all, we'll talk about it at the end, but like that's where it kind of all comes together and makes sense to me. But
yeah, so the ship is, well, it's garbage.
Yeah.
It's garbage. Zoe's like, you really bought this ship? This is trash. Like, isn't, it doesn't have anything going for it. And Mal's like, well, if we have a good engineer, this thing will run forever, basically. And they're like, oh, well, if you say so.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, does anything else happen in that sequence? I don't think it does.
No. So nothing else happens in that sequence. Just kind of Zoe goes like, what is that? And it kind of, at first it seems like she's saying it in reference to something Mal was saying, and he responds, and she's like, no, literally, what is that?
Oh yeah, there's
there's like a dead animal or something in the cargo hold. Mal also has a funny line like, oh, when we get it running again, it'll be great. And Zoe says, again, so you mean it's not running right now?
Right. They basically...
And Mal's like, nah.
Yeah, he bought like a junk ship, essentially. Apparently, like, seemingly without knowing that it's like a Firefly class ship, which are very sought after, he seemed to have not, like, given that ending scene, it doesn't seem like he really registered what he was actually buying. He was just drawn to it inexplicably.
It called out to him.
Yeah,
it summoned him.
As did to the rest of the crew. They didn't choose to put a sinister spin on it, I guess. They didn't choose to be on Serenity. Well, Serenity chose them.
Jane did.
Yeah, Jane did.
Jane chose.
Jane did. But then we get the other sequence. We go into the other sequence, which, surprisingly enough, it's Simon's birthday.
Yeah, this is like the recent past.
Yeah, this is like 20 minutes before Mal is bleeding. It's not 20 minutes, it's like a couple hours, but like, yeah. So River has some dialogue about how like birthdays are completely arbitrary when you have like a multi-planet society and everything. And then Kaylee comes out with a cake that is actually not like made of typical cake ingredients, but is actually just like a sort of cake approximation using probably the protein like foodstuffs that they had on hand or whatever that we kind of saw.
Yeah, she said she tried to get it to taste as much like chocolate as she could.
So it's not an actual birthday, because birthdays make no sense in Firefly universe, and it's not an actual cake, but they're doing the best they can, and they even have some candles.
River does reveal that whole explanation was just cover for the fact that she didn't get Simon anything. But she's just trying to explain away like why she didn't buy Simon anything.
There's also the fact that they're wanted like fugitives, so they're out in the middle of nowhere, so there's that too.
They also do establish some important context here for later in the episode, that they're still trying to get to the town of Greenleaf, which has been mentioned multiple times in episodes prior to this.
I didn't pick up on that.
and that Mal has requested them to go like specifically in the most like under the radar, out of the way route possible,
Which
as far away from people as they can be.
did you notice that Jane is pronouncing Inara's name? I don't know if it's wrong, but it's definitely different than all the other characters say it. He's saying what is he
yes,
saying? Anera or
he says
something like that.
Anira. And I was actually going to ask you both that, and did you notice that he actually says it both ways in this episode? Because he says it that way at this party, but at the very end of the episode, when they come back to rescue Mal, he says Inara the same way everybody else does.
Well,
So he's not even self-consistent with his pronunciation of her name.
yeah, that's pretty realistic as a person whose name is actually, my name's not hard to pronounce, but people just get it wrong all the time. Because like, as someone who has a non, I guess, normal in quotes name, there's like, I'll get the same person pronouncing my name all different kinds of ways.
I think you just have a unique spelling. Your name is not uncommon, but I think your specific spelling of your name is uncommon.
Yeah, it's true.
At least in my experience.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, like my boss, like at work, like 80% of the time will pronounce my name correctly, and then like 20% of the time he'll say like Kian or something like that, which is really weird because I've known him for years. But yeah. So I guess it's not all that unrealistic to have one person inconsistently pronounce the same name.
Yeah, how does it feel, cayenne?
Yeah, cayenne pepper. You don't even know how many times I've gotten that, and that specific reference to cayenne pepper.
Gee, it's like every time I tell people I'm a cosmologist, they go like, "Oh, is that like cosmetology?" God damn it!
I don't even know. I don't know what either of those things is.
Cosmology is the history of the universe. Cosmetology is like when you go to the hairdresser, those people go to cosmetology school. There you go. That's like the simplest way I can describe that.
Really? It's like a hair. It's like a
hair and makeup type thing.
That's so weird. I would have never guessed that.
Interestingly, they both come from the same Greek word, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, we actually do. Okay, now that you mentioned it, we skipped this.
Oh,
but in one of the earlier episodes, like episode 2 or 3, we actually talked about this when we watched Serenity, the pilot. Like, Mal, the root of Mal is like, it means bad. But then like River actually just straight up says that in one of the episodes. Do you remember that? She's like, Mal, the Latin root means bad. It's just like, you can't get any more on the nose.
I do remember that.
We skipped that over in that episode, so a very opportune moment to go back to it here. And actually, so I wasn't going to talk about this till the end, but it's kind of relevant here, so whatever. I watched another behind-the-scenes feature. This time it was sort of a roundtable discussion over lunch between Joss Whedon and a few of the actors, and I'll go into more detail at the end of the episode, but Joss Whedon revealed in this discussion that, like, I don't know if we talked about this or knew it, but he was like, Mal was originally a more sinister guy, and he references the I forget which episode it's in, but it's the one where Mal like returns the goods to the town when he realizes they're like dying of that plague or whatever.
The train job.
Yeah, the train job.
The train job.
He said like his original conception of Mal was a guy who would like never do that, who would just say, "Well, tough luck," and go off. So
I think we did talk about it actually, like in the context of the fact that when Fox told them to rewrite to make a new pilot, they also told them to tone Mal down heavily from Serenity because he was so mean. Mean feels like such a simplistic and like reductionist word to use in that context.
He was just like really ruthless.
Yeah, ruthless is a good word to use for that.
Anyway, where the heck were we in this episode?
So he's got the cake and they've got the candles and they're like, oh, blow the candles out. And then like River says something like fire, and Simon goes, oh yeah, like you don't like fire, like I'll blow it out. And she says no fire, and then like this huge flaming fireball comes like screaming down the corridor, and Zoe shoves River out of the way and takes the brunt of the force full on in the face right before Mal can shut the door.
So she's out of commission for the rest of the episode. Like we said before, she was on her honeymoon. Gina Torres, that is, actually, not Zoe herself.
Pulling a Doctor Who here and writing someone out for the whole episode so they can go on vacation.
And pretty soon, actually, we'll get a little bit more with Wash. Speaking of honeymoons, with Wash and Zoe, we don't see their honeymoon or even like how their relationship started, but we see their meeting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Is that the...
It's right now,
yeah, I was going to say, I
actually.
think that's actually the next flashback, is that.
Yeah, it's them like giving Wash the job as the pilot, and he's still wearing his Hawaiian shirts, but he has like this.
He has
this handlebar mustache.
He has a Magnum PI Tom Selleck mustache. That's a reference for all the above 30s who listen to this podcast.
He doesn't have the sort of spiked up hair, which gives him a very distinctive look.
I also don't know if it was just me, but it felt like Wash had a little bit of a heavier accent in this flashback. Maybe that was just me.
No, I think he did. I'm pretty sure. Watched it a couple days ago. My memory's starting to fail me.
I watched this 2 hours ago, so I don't know why I can't remember this more specifically, but...
I think he did. I think he had a little more of an accent.
All right, so I wasn't just imagining that then.
But that's, people with strong regional accents, like when they're in their own, region, have that accent, but then like when they're out of it, can very easily go into a less accented version of themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I actually learned about something, I guess a stronger form of this, or maybe it's just the explanation for this, but there are some people, I guess everybody does this to some varying degree, but some people do this to a great degree. It's called like accent, being an accent chameleon, or unconscious accent mimicry. So there are some people who will like go to a new area and will like mimic that accent completely unknowingly. Whereas, some people don't mimic the accent of the local region or other people even at all. And it's like very interesting, the like delineation between who mimics accents quite strongly and who doesn't.
Yeah, that's people also do that, not with accents, but like, well, they do it with accents obviously, but like that also happens with like, and I know about this because I actually do this to a strong degree, is like some people, and like with the accents, everyone does it, you fall somewhere on the spectrum, but mimicking like patterns of the person you're talking to.
Oh yeah, definitely. I know that I definitely do the accent one more than speech patterns. When I'm with my parents, my accent is quite a bit stronger, like if I'm talking with just my parents, than like say for this podcast. I guess for this podcast my accent is usually a little weaker, mainly because the only person I'm talking to is you, Keon.
Yeah.
But like when I'm talking with my parents, my accent gets quite a bit stronger because their accent is quite a bit stronger, so
yeah, interesting stuff.
Yeah, very interesting.
Maybe we should rank the Firefly characters on their accent like spectrum, how much they mimic the other characters. Maybe actually, hold on, maybe like this has something to do with Jane's pronunciation. Let's look at the context in which he pronounces Inara's name. So the first time he's with everyone, they're all sitting around the table, and he says it, what I assume is incorrectly. And then later on, he's just talking to Mal, and he says it correctly? I don't know.
Well, I guess... Yeah, I was going to say maybe Inara's only present in the second situation, but that's not true either. She's
she's
telling a story at the first one, yeah.
It seems like I'm probably wrong about this, but I feel like she doesn't usually join them for stuff like this. You know, I get that feeling, even if it's been proven to be not the case. But like,
She doesn't, because usually she's off screen, you know, she's with a client or she's involved in like the B plot. This is like one of the first times she's really been in one of the group settings.
Mm-hmm. She's definitely, as we'll see in her flashback, she's definitely the most detached member of the crew.
Yeah, she's the most... Yeah, detached is a good word. I was trying to find the words to say what I want to, but I can't find them at the moment, so whatever.
I think at this point in the episode, we go back to Mal bleeding out and struggling to get somewhere. We don't know where yet. I think. I can't remember exactly. I think this might be...
So, yeah, so... This is where we get... so so after seeing how Zoe and Wash met, or maybe it's before, we see like I think it's actually after, we see a present day scene where they're like shooting adrenaline into Zoe to like keep her alive.
Mm-hmm.
And then it cuts to present day Mal injecting himself with adrenaline in the sick bay.
Yeah, it's a massive needle too. Like it's like a foot long.
Yeah, it's it's a stab, all right.
Yeah, and how they use it is like they just jab it straight into the person. What looks like it's straight into the person's heart. Like,
I think that's actually, you know, I mean, it's comical, but I think that's actually how you actually inject adrenaline into people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
So Mal injects himself with adrenaline and starts staggering towards the engine room, at which point we get a flashback to... We've already met the current mechanic, whose name I didn't write down.
I didn't either. But when I first saw him, I was like, wow, flashback Kaylee looks completely different.
Yeah, because I think... So when they're hiring Wash... Mal says something like, we've already got a genius mechanic, and you think, oh, well, it's obviously Kaylee, but then this guy, his name's like Bert or something, like walks by and he's like, no one's ever called me genius before, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah, he looks sort of like this, I don't know, like surfer guy. And the vibe you get from him is that he's like incredibly inept.
Yeah, I mean, he's very laid back at the very least,
Mm-hmm.
which...
Yeah. Well, you find out basically right now, as we go into Kaylee's flashback, that he doesn't really know what he's doing. Destroy my life? What? Who said that?
So the next flashback we get, which is the current one, like we said, after Mal injects himself with adrenaline, is Mal like wondering where... I'm just gonna go with a Bert. This guy's name is Bert now, as far as I'm concerned.
It's
Wait,
Bester.
actually, I have it's Bester. Yeah, I was gonna say I have the wiki open. Yeah, it's Bester.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was close. In my defense, I was close.
Played the younger Hank
Anyway.
Pym in Ant-Man.
Oh, great.
He was actually in 42. Huh.
Was he?
He played racist City Island fan. I don't know. I know what those four individual words mean, but what they mean together is beyond me.
So, well, anyway, Mal's wondering why they're still on the ground. He's like, what's going on? And then you just hear, like, in the background, and you can
Christ.
pretty easily figure out what's going on. And he's like, Bester, what the heck is going on
the sound
here?
effect, didn't you?
Yeah, it was the easiest way to describe what's going on without going R-rated and having to put a mature tag on this podcast. It's one of those, like, if you know kind of things. I just did the podcast equivalent of, like, the TV 14 version of what that is.
Oh, wow. Okay, so my bad. I was actually confusing 42 with 24, the show. 42 is a 2013 movie about baseball. About Jack.
Wow, I really thought you... Oh, about Jackie Robinson?
Yeah, about Jackie Robinson.
I thought you were referring to 42, the Doctor Who episode 42.
Oh, no, yeah.
Wow, we were both all over the place on that. Anyway, yeah, so we find out that the woman he's doing it with is Kaylee because...
She stands up.
Bester claims that a certain thing is wrong with the ship, and Kaylee just goes, no, it's not. And Bester's like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, you just need to take this part out and bypass it, and then boom, it works.
Yeah, she has like a little hack for why they don't actually need the part that Bester claims is missing. And
well, Bester claims an entirely different part even is like not even there or missing, and she's like, that part doesn't even matter. What matters is this box thing.
Yeah.
That you don't even need.
What matters is box from StarCom.
Why? How have we worked two separate references to box into this podcast in the past 5 episodes? Like, how is that a thing?
It's probably because his name is so generic. It's just box. Anyway, Mal gives Kaylee a job on the spot, and Bester's like, never would have guessed that you needed 2 different mechanics.
Yeah, and he just goes, we don't. See you later, bud. And he's like, wait,
I know,
what?
This actually, like, it's funny, but it's honestly, if you think about it from Bester's point of view, like, it seriously sucks. Like, he just got dumped on a random planet, probably far away from anywhere he's ever been, probably far away from home.
Not only that, like, consider the fact that, okay, so he's a little incompetent, and he was a little slow in fixing the ship, but consider, like, he just got dumped because he just was like, you know, he wanted to have a little fun and off time and like decided to do it in the engine room.
While you're supposed to be on the job and while they're 2 weeks delayed.
Yeah, okay, so he's slacking off on the job, but like just think about how like if he had just done this in their bedroom or in his quarters, you know, Kaylee would have never had the opportunity to point out what was wrong. He would have still had a job. Like, there were so many decisions along the way that just, like, if he had made even a slightly different decision, he would have been fine.
Yep, that's just how the cookie crumbles, I guess. It's just how life goes.
So, nice going, Bester. But anyway, we cut to the near past where Kaylee is investigating the engine and is like, okay, so we need to replace the, what is it, like the compensator or something?
Yeah, it's like the flux capacitor or something.
The flux capacitor. The compression coil, that's what it is. Mm-hmm. Which I only know because the Screen Rant article is like, oh, remember like how in the train job, Kaylee was like, oh, the compression coil is going to blow soon if we don't replace it. And they like brought that back in this episode.
Hell yeah, Screen Rant coming through.
That exact same fun fact is on the TV tropes page for this episode, so.
Hell yeah, TV tropes. The most valuable source of analysis on the internet. That's not true, actually. Well, anyway. She reveals that they're running out of air. Maybe that's what the title of the episode refers to. Out of gas, you know, out of oxygen, you know, the gas that they need to survive.
Yeah, I guess. That could work. I don't know. I mean, feels a little contrived and hackneyed, but sure, why not? Feels like if you asked Tim Minear if that was what he was going for with the title of this episode, his response would be something along the lines of, yeah, that's what I was going for.
But it works nonetheless, so I'm going to roll with it.
Well, I'm not going to stop you, so.
2 characters that, again, you wouldn't think would have such a heart-to-heart, but do for the second time in the show. Simon and Inara. They get to talking, and Simon is like, I think Inara actually mentions, like, let's save our breaths, because we're about to, like, suffocate, and Simon's like, actually, we'll, like, he said, like, we'll freeze to death first.
He said, like, we'll be dead before then.
Yeah, we'll be dead before then. It's actually River who says they'll freeze to death. So, hey, like brother, like sister. Both think in very morbid terms, but, yeah.
Yeah, and River says that to Shepherd Book. I suppose we should clarify.
In their only like important scene for both of those characters in this episode. Not really. That's not true, but I'm just hyperbolizing for the sake of comedy, as I usually do.
That's why I keep you around. Implying that this podcast is my creation solely, and I have the ability to just kick you off at any time.
I mean, it's like 85% you. Like,
I do
well,
most of the
running
behind the
it,
scenes
at least,
work, but
yeah.
all of the like public facing stuff you do. So I think it evens out at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I just take solace. This is all I'll say. Solace in the fact that like I'm the funny one. You know? That's actually not totally true.
Oh, I wasn't even going to make any comment disputing that because I felt it would be funnier if I just didn't even dispute it. You've already undermined your own comment, so hey.
Yeah.
Anyway, cut back to the present, well, Mal is dying. Yeah. Anyway, we actually cut back to the distant past. Again. No, do we?
We see Mal reinserting the device, but it falls down and it goes down into like an area that's almost completely inaccessible.
Yeah, that's what happens. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Although I do, before we move too far away from the Kaylee introduction, where her and Bester are having a time in the engine room, for some reason that scene like triggered recollection in my mind, like I've seen it before somehow. Like, and I don't know how I would have, because I'm like decently sure I never watched any episode beyond Serenity, but for some reason like that scene just like I feel like I've seen it before somehow, and I don't know how or why or when, but I just have, I guess.
Huh.
It was very weird. Maybe I saw it on TV sometime, like it was on a channel and I flipped by it, or someone else was watching it. I don't know.
Maybe it's just a
scene.
Deja vu. You know, who knows?
I mean, that is possible. I'm not going to rule it out. Like, maybe I'm thinking of a very similar scene in a completely different show. I don't know.
Yeah, like that that Neo Trinity sex scene in The Matrix Revolutions.
I always forget that exists. Thanks for reminding me.
That was kind of similar to this. You know, Mal and Zoe and Wash were off like at a rave, and no, I'm kidding.
A lot of things that happen in the first 3 Matrix movies, I'm like still not even convinced actually happened. You know, like I remember things that happened in the Matrix movie, and I go, "There's no way that happened. It must be a fever dream." But then, like, they actually happened. You know, I'm thinking like the massive rave orgy thing. Like, wasn't really an orgy, but there was definitely some nudity in that scene.
Yeah.
Just like when I think about that, I'm like, there's no way that happened in a Matrix movie, but then I'm like, it actually did though.
Yep. And that's only going to be exacerbated with Matrix 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
Apparently.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Don't even yeah. Oh yeah.
Kool-Aid Man.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we don't need to dwell on that.
Let's actually not dwell on it and get back to. Let's like explicitly not dwell on it.
They decide to use escape shuttles. Mal comes up with this plan where it's like 4 to a shuttle, but there's 9 crew members. Surprise, he's the odd man out, and he decides that he's staying with Serenity while the other escape.
Yeah, he explicitly says forward person to a shuttle because that way both shuttles have an equal chance of surviving and either finding help or just getting out.
Yeah.
And so on a Nara shuttle, it's Anara, Jane, um, who goes on a Nara shuttle? Shepard, what is it?
Yeah,
Shepard,
Shepherd
Book,
Book and
and
Kaylee. No,
River?
it's Kaylee.
Or Kaylee?
Because the
Kaylee.
other
Oh, yeah,
one,
because
Simon and
the other
River.
one is Simon, River, Zoe, and
Mm-hmm.
Wash because Simon needs to go with Zoe because she still needs medical assistance.
Yeah. And Mal stays behind. They try to dispute this a little bit. They try and convince him to come along, but he doesn't listen. And there's sort of this heartfelt goodbye scene, and then they take off. They're still in the middle of nowhere, so there's not a great chance that they'll find anyone, but I guess it's better than freezing to death on Serenity.
Wash does also like hook up an emergency button, I suppose, that like if help arrives for Mal, he can hit this red button and it'll send a signal to the two shuttles calling them back.
Mm-hmm. And then so Mal basically just goes into the bridge basically and just like cuddles up in a little blanket to wait for the end.
We skipped. I don't know how we skipped this. Mal and Wash have a sort of pseudo argument where Mal basically convinces Wash to hook the emergency beacon into the navigation radio, I guess, which like it's implied they used to do as a prank to like disable people's navigation system, but which Wash realizes if anybody that it will extend the range of the distress beacon, but will additionally like it'll disable people's navigation consoles and they'll have to like pick out the distress beacon before they'll be able to continue, and that will make them more likely to actually come and help if they have to work to pick out the distress beacon because they can't go anywhere while they're doing that without navigation.
Yeah, and this sort of argument actually started when they're in the medical bay, and Mal tells Wash to go find out what happened. So this is way earlier in the episode, but Wash is like, "Nah, man, like I'm not leaving Zoe's side," and Mal just straight up grabs him by the collar and he's like, "Go find out what happened."
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of get into this little argument over that, and it's I guess it's sort of a character moment or something for Mal.
Right. I don't know also if we mentioned that Zoe's first impression of Wash was I hate him.
We didn't mention that.
Or I don't like him.
Yeah, just further reinforcing the like what you already got as more of a vibe, which is that like Zoe was way out of Wash's league.
Well, I mean, especially with that Tom Selleck mustache. I'm not going to say it made him look bad, but I'm not going to say it did him any favors either.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Mal eventually, he drifts off into sleep, and he eventually actually does pick up a signal. Or someone picks up his signal, rather.
Yeah, and he's asleep, actually, when it comes through, and then he wakes up, and he realizes that someone's, like, trying to contact him. He's like, oh, shoot!
Right away, you can tell, though, that it's not, like, a very nice person or a trusting, person.
Yeah, he's like, how do I know you guys aren't tricking us?
Right.
And Mal's like, you can scan me. I have no oxygen. I'm literally dying.
Mm-hmm. So they make a trade.
Sort of.
So they do this trade. Yeah, they do this trade, but Mal gets backstabbed.
Well, yeah, because they think that Mal might be
Deceiving
I
them.
don't know, deceiving them, ambushing them. So they get on the ship, they search it, they realize there really is no one else on board. So they're like, well, I guess we're taking your ship then and just shoot Mal.
Yeah.
Explaining why he's bleeding out while he's been doing everything this whole episode.
Mm-hmm. But in probably one of the coolest scenes, I guess, Mal just kind of, he gets up and he's cupping his wound, he's holding in the blood, trying to maintain his balance, and he has his gun on them, and he basically just tells them to get out, leave the part, and they're like snickering, and because they know he's gonna die, and they comply, but they sort of it's as if they're making fun of him as they leave type thing.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised they left, considering they're carrying like semi-automatic machine guns, and he's got like a revolver.
Yeah,
And they're like, oh no, we'll leave.
I think it's like, if they try anything, he'll at least get a shot in on their captain or their like head guy, so he instructs the rest of them to be able to stand down.
To comply, yeah.
And as he leaves, he says, "You would have done the same." And Mal responds by saying, "You can already. I think we can already see that I haven't," or something like that. Nice little cool Joss Whedon line for you, even though Joss Whedon doesn't write this.
Yeah, but maybe he slipped in a few bangers.
Maybe. Anyway, Mal then toils back to, not back because we got this piecemeal and in flashbacks, but he toils to the engine room. And
yeah, he fixes the engine, but collapses right before getting back to the button.
Right.
To call back the shuttles. Mm-hmm.
But then when he wakes up, he's in the medical bay surrounded by the rest of the crew.
Yeah, it turns out that Zoe woke up at some point and demanded they turn back.
Mm-hmm. So they kind of explain...
To go get them. To go get Mal, sorry.
Yeah. And then, so the same thing, I guess, happened on the other shuttle. They felt that they needed to come back. Kind of mirroring what we saw in the flashbacks. They were, including Mal, as we're about to find out, they were all drawn to Serenity. And, even now, they're still drawn to it. And then Mal wakes up for real. This was actually just like a dream that he had moments before death. And no, I'm just kidding.
He does have a moment where he thinks that, though, because he turns to everybody and goes, "Wait, you'll all still be here when I wake up, right?"
Right.
Jane has a line about something like that they would have been there quicker, but Inara's shuttle has like problems. He also has like a throwaway line about Inara's incense on the ship. And I don't remember if it was TV Tropes or the wiki that mentioned this, but one of them mentioned that in Serenity, the movie, we find out that Inara keeps flashbangs in her in her shuttle disguised as incense. And so there was some speculation that possibly Inara forced that shuttle to go back by flashbanging Jane.
Well, it seems like a massive reach from the dialogue in this episode.
I don't know. It seems in character with Inara, with both Inara and Jane, though. Because even before they go off, Mal has this whole thing where he tells Inara, like, "Don't trust Jane. You're paid up for a whole other month, so it's still your shuttle for at least another month."
Yeah, sure, I guess.
Like, don't let Jane be in charge.
Yeah, I guess, it makes sense, but yeah, at the same time, reasoning is not equal to evidence, so I don't know about that. I don't know why I'm being so harsh on a random throwaway thing.
Yeah, it feels like you are being unusually harsh, but hey, I'm not going to criticize you for it, I guess.
Anyway, the final thing we see in this episode is, surprisingly enough, Mal's introduction to Serenity. We find out that the sales pitch from the beginning of the episode was for a completely different ship. And while this guy is giving the sales pitch, Mal is just not even paying attention. He's just looking out towards this desert area where he sees Serenity.
Yep. The ship that the guy's talking about is actually kind of, maybe this is a hot take, but kind of looks cooler than Serenity. But anyway.
We don't see it in...
It looks kind of like one of those standard, like, extraterrestrial ships in, like, every sci-fi show, that lands, like, it's got, like, 3 thrusters, like, kind of like a tripod that it lands on, and...
Yeah, one of the, like, flies horizontally, lands vertically type thing. Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, at the end you find out, like, okay, that's where That's the whole gist of the episode. Maybe this was clear before, but it wasn't to me. But it's like, all right, so this is sort of, you know, they're all, for whatever reason, drawn to this ship.
We completely, oh my, I don't know how we did this. We completely skipped over Jane's introduction to Serenity.
Oh yeah, we did.
So Jane's introduction is that Mal and Zoe are being held up by a crew, some people, a gang, of which Jane is one of the members. And I think Mal has a snarky line like, which do you think is easiest to turn? And Zoe's like, oh, the ugly one. And Mal kind of pauses for a second and then goes like, can you be more specific, Zoe?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they eventually, they're like, hey, you, like, how much of a cut are you getting? And he's like, I get 7%. And Mal just goes, 7%? Yikes. And Jane's like, what, is that bad? And Mal's like, no, it's not bad.
Yeah, he reverse psychologies Jane to joining Serenity. Also gives him his own room. That helps.
Yeah, eventually they do convince Jane by telling him that he'll have his own quarters if he joins them. So he shoots the other guy in like the leg, and then we don't see what happens after that, but obviously Jane joins Serenity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how the flashbacks to all the crew members joining like kind of come together in the end with Mal's flashback, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, part of this episode is dealing with like just bear with me here. I'm just making this up as I go along. But like,
okay,
kind of thought about it a little bit before, but mostly just making it up as I go along. But like, part of the episode kind of deals with like a narrative tension, right? Of like, all right, how did Mal get into this situation where he's bleeding out? Like, what are the events leading up to it? How did it all play out? How did it all happen? And you're that's what grabs you. The other part of the story, I don't know if it deals with that sort of same narrative tension in the same way, where it's like you're seeing all these flashbacks, and you're thinking, how does this relate? Right? It's not even like it's not sort of a tension within the story, but a tension within you of like, all right, how does this all piece together? What does it have to do with anything?
Mm-hmm.
And then it all comes together at the end, where it's like this bond that they have, sort of maybe not even with each other, but like this unspoken thing that kind of led them to Serenity. It leads them back in the end to save Mal. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the episode, I don't know. The episode's really well put together, so I agree with you. There is, when it opens, you're like, well, how did we get to this situation? And we receive all the bits and pieces, like how the ship broke and how Mal got shot and how to get where everybody else went. But when we get each of those individual pieces, we also get further context into like how they joined Serenity in the first place. And I think that it's really, really interestingly done how we get both the context for how we're in the situation, but at the same time get like even deeper context.
Yeah, how are we really in this situation? Let's go back even further.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. I mean, I know you're saying that as a joke, but it's also like kind of true.
Mm-hmm.
We made a joke on this podcast, I think 2 weeks ago, relative to when this goes out, about like, we made a joke about someone being responsible for something and then being like, well, if you really think about it, like Mal and Zoe are responsible for even getting everybody into the situation to begin with. And that's like almost what this episode is like a continuation of that, where it's like, oh yeah, like Kaylee told Mal what part she needs to fix the ship, but how did Kaylee get into the situation to begin with? I'm being very facetious about this whole thing, but I think you know what I'm saying.
We really should have gotten Simon and River and Shepherd Book's flashback, which is just Serenity inserted into the middle of this episode in its entirety.
Well, I was thinking about this because, and I can't believe I'm going back to the the Screen Rant article of all things, but the Screen Rant article asserts that because this aired 5th instead of 8th, that it didn't have as much of an emotional impact because you weren't as attached to all the characters. But I was kind of thinking about this while I watched this. Like, I almost think that this episode would kind of have worked as the pilot episode. Sure, you wouldn't have been as attached to Mal as maybe you are already, but it would have been a really interesting way to introduce all these characters because they're absent from the episode, but you're finding out how they got onto Serenity. I don't know. I wanted to ask you what you thought about, like, if this, how you think, or if you think this would have worked as, like, the first episode.
No, I don't. Sorry to break it to you. I don't really think it would have worked as the first episode at all. Because, like, to me, maybe this is not true for you or for everyone, but to me, and probably for other people as well, like, what the flashbacks are doing is, yeah, they're introducing how the characters got on board the ship, but, like, it's not really what they're doing in the episode, if that makes sense. What they're doing in the episode is, well, to me at least, and I guess maybe I'm just generalizing based on my own perspective, but I would guess that some other people think this too, is like, you know, as you see the flashbacks, you're like, all right, but how does this even tie into anything that's happening in the episode? Like, what's the point of putting, or what's the, how does it all fit in together? Like, where you're seeing the characters' introductions in this episode of all episodes. This story of Mal getting shot and, you know, the ship breaking down. But so I guess the ultimate, like, payoff or value of that is that, like, you see at the end with Mal and his sort of, his being drawn to Serenity is the same as the other characters too. They're all, for some reason or another, drawn back to the ship. So I don't know. I guess I'm just repeating myself at this point, but yeah.
Interesting. I don't know. I was just wondering, like, I don't know. I think this episode would, I think those flashbacks would serve a different purpose if this was the first episode. I think it's difficult to divorce ourselves from the context of having 7 episodes of knowing these characters already and what that means for the flashbacks.
Yeah, sure. And but it's also a thing too of, like, you don't necessarily need a character's origin in the first episode, right? You just kind of need who they are.
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
Because you're establishing, I guess, just from, like, a writing perspective, you're establishing who people are, and it kind of gets, if you're also trying to establish their origin and their backstory at the same time, it, you know, it sort of, you can get a little muddled there. So.
Yeah, but in a way, this episode, I feel, almost isn't even about the characters. It's like, you know, every episode we've had so far is, I think there is a character or 2 characters who is, like, the focus of the plot, and I almost feel like this episode for this week, the actual character, so to speak, is Serenity itself, and maybe from that point of view, it would be an interesting exercise in it being the first episode where the characters even are sort of second nature to the ship in this episode. Because if you think about it, like you said, everybody's flashback is about how they're drawn to Serenity. You know, Kaylee even refers to Serenity as, like, a person and saying, she always tells me when something's wrong, and I didn't see this coming. So, like, I almost feel like this is the Serenity episode, if we want to look at it in that framework.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Good episode, you know, very sort of enjoyable episode to watch.
And like I said, I think that's a common or popular point of view in the fandom.
Yeah, maybe we can do our own, like, at the end of this, our own, like, custom viewing order, like, for the prisoner.
Oh jeez.
I'll probably just do a joke one, like I did with the prisoner.
I feel like 90% I did a joke on that one too, I feel like. on the prisoner
I
as well.
actually don't
but
remember
anyway.
yours. I remember mine, but not yours.
I don't remember mine either.
Mine was just the exact same order as we watched it for the show, but you just don't watch Fallout. You just don't get that payoff.
God, the biggest like blue balls in the history of television is not
Just end
watching
it once upon a
Fallout.
time.
Once Upon a Time is such like chaos.
Yeah, and plus it ends with him going into the room that Fallout takes place in. The only prisoner episode to lead into the next one.
The best prisoner viewing order would be to watch Once Upon a Time first, watch the rest of the show, and then just not watch Fallout. Just really delay the like non-gratification.
Yeah, like watching Star Wars Episode 5 and then going 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. But we don't need to get started on that. I actually have my own Star Wars custom viewing order, so we don't need to get it.
I hope it's to watch episode 6 right up to when Palpatine goes, "Join me, Luke," and Luke is about to strike down Vader, and then you just stop, watch the other 5 episodes, and never finish. I'm obviously excluding the sequel trilogy from this for humor's sake.
And the 20 separate watches of the holiday special. Don't forget that. Interspersed throughout the run.
If you included that in the run, it might just make you beg Luke to actually kill Vader when you return to episode 6.
Yeah,
Anyway,
the final message of the series is not that, like, there's truly good in even the darkest of people. It's that you're fed up with this franchise and someone needs to die.
It needs to end. Let the past die. Kill it if you have to.
Some things can never truly be redeemed. Anyway.
Let's do some segments here. Let's do some segments.
Before we do, I guess you can actually consider this a segment. I watched that little behind-the-scenes thing, so we can kind of go over that, I guess. Right. Like I said before, it's basically like a roundtable discussion. It's Joss Whedon, Nathan Fillion, Alan Tudyk, if that's how you pronounce his name. I still don't know.
Pretty sure that's how you pronounce it.
And it's what's-his-face who played Book. I'm blanking on his name.
Dang, so I am too, actually.
Shoot, what the heck is it? Oh, Ron Glass. It's Ron Glass.
Ron Glass.
So it's those 4. They're eating lunch. This is recorded in 2008 for the initial Blu-ray release of the show. And they're just discussing Firefly, basically. It's sort of a freeform discussion. It's honestly, it's really awkward because they're like eating like a pretty fancy meal while they're talking about this. you never really get a clear image of what they're eating. But Joss is eating.
That's what's important.
Well, I was trying to figure it out. I was like, what the heck are they actually eating? It's at one point like they're eating a salad, but maybe it's sort of a multi-course meal. I don't know. Joss is eating with chopsticks. The rest of them are just using forks and knives.
Nice.
Yeah. And they're just going through the show, detailing some random anecdotes. I'll just go through my notes here really quick. We don't have to dwell on this for too long. Joss Whedon has an earring in his left ear. I realized watching this. Nathan Fillion at one point thought he got fired on the pilot. Yeah, I forget why he said that, but at one point he thought he was going to be fired. Joss Whedon says that Firefly, after, he did 2 shows which were the name of a character, which was Buffy the Vampire Slayer and
Angel, I think, right?
Angel? Wasn't Angel? I thought Angel was after Firefly, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, he said he did those 2 shows that were the name of a character. and so Firefly was really his attempt at like an ensemble. It was, and yeah, like we were saying in the episode, like Serenity, the Firefly class cruiser, is sort of this central character, I guess, that brings these different characters together as an ensemble cast. So it's kind of what his not his take because he created the show, but like his outlook on what he was doing.
It is in a way his take on the show. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. What else here? Oh, some of the interrogations and bushwhacks were improvised. Like if you remember back to when the crew were being interrogated, I couldn't
Yeah.
I couldn't make out. They don't really explain it too well, so I don't know how much was improvised. But like definitely some of Alan Tudyk's lines were. He was saying like he said his lines, and then they didn't cut the scene. They just kept the camera rolling, and he was just like, okay. So he just kept talking.
It's kind of like how in Blink in Doctor Who that they basically just let David Tennant ramble for like 5 minutes to fill out some like background video of him talking to be used in the episode.
Yeah.
And like in the special features, they included like his entire little speech, and it's just like random stuff about like, oh, never eat pears.
Yeah, well, that was the thing that actually like made it into the episode, right? Is they're fast forwarding through this scene, and then they play it on normal speed for like 2 seconds, and he's like, and remember, never eat pears.
Yeah, but that yeah, I guess my point was that whole thing is like very similar. It's just him talking to the camera for 5 to 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And he's actually right, I hadn't had a pear in like a couple years, but I actually had one recently, and I forgot how like sandy the texture was,
I personally like pears, but to each their own.
I do too. I really like the taste. It's just the consistency. Same with peaches, actually. I hate the texture of peaches. I can't stand it, actually. The taste is phenomenal.
For some reason, I don't know. I've never considered peaches to have a particularly unique texture.
Really, they're fuzzy.
Oh, I guess I never really consider the outside of the peach.
Mm-hmm. I guess if you peeled peaches, yeah, like the ones out of the can, yeah, those are good.
Well, like I guess, yeah, I was thinking of the time I baked them into a pie.
Mm-hmm.
Which I didn't peel the peaches when I baked them into the pie, but the act of baking them into the pie made the fuzziness a bit of a non-factor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, just continuing on through this. This is, I guess, kind of random because they did talk about things in like a very random way. So at one point, the director of photography, I didn't write down his name, but I should have, suggested and did swap out the lenses for older lenses to get more flares. I think we actually talked about that at some point on the podcast before. It seems to ring a bell.
Probably when we talked about all the zooms.
Yeah. Joss Whedon's father, I learned from this, was also a screenwriter. He wrote Golden Girls.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there you go. There's your bit of nepotism for the week. Not really. Joss Whedon is maybe as much as I hate to admit it. I don't hate to admit it, but as much as it's kind of weird to admit, he's like a very competent screenwriter. Weird because of all the different allegations and things that have come to light with him. He's pretty good at his job despite all those, you have to admit. Not that it absolves him.
No, it doesn't really absolve him at all, but yeah, it actually kind of makes them like all the things that went on worse. Cause
yeah, basically just means that he's not going to face repercussions for any of it because he's good at his job.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the point I was going to make and couldn't find the words to. So thanks for putting into words what I could not.
Nathan Fillion tells this kind of sad story where it's like he actually watched them tear the sets down for Firefly. He was at Fox for some other appointment, and he like just popped his head in to where they were shooting Firefly, or where they had shot it, and they were tearing the sets down.
Wow.
This is at a point, remember, in the show that like the people making the show know about the fan adoration for it and how well it was received already.
Nice.
Hell yeah. Joss Whedon tells this story about how Tim Minear like saved his ass multiple times on different scripts where he like didn't know what to do, and Minear stepped in and helped him, but also pronounces Boba Fett as Boba Fett.
Oh, heck yeah, my favorite Star Wars character, Boba Fett.
Yeah. So Joss Whedon makes fun of him for this. And then they go on to some ideas that they had for Firefly that never went into the show. Joss Whedon's ideas are pretty out there, but Alan Tudyk's ideas are further out there. He had an idea that the characters would go through this like wormhole, and they would
like what, Blake 7?
Yeah. But then they would come out the other side with like all these weird defects. Like I think he said like Wash's hands would grow like multiple sizes, and he would just have massive hands. But the whole thing for the episode is like that was just the premise for the episode. So they actually had to do this job as their goal in the episode, but they would do it with all the defects that they had garnered from the wormhole.
Yeah, when you said that was just the premise for the episode, it reminded me of like how before we started recording, I was like, so I've got this idea for a book, and you were like, that sounds like a pretty fleshed out idea, and I'm like, yeah, but I have no conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. National Novel Writing Month coming up as we speak.
It'll have started when this episode goes out.
Yeah.
We were recording this on Monday, October 25th, 2021. For those of you who are curious, I guess.
Anyway, continuing on here, Joss Whedon's idea that never got made into a script was monster cattle. It was like, I guess, mutated like monster cows.
Cows?
Yeah.
Okay.
He'd incorporate cows into the show, but not monster cows.
Yeah, but not how he wanted.
Then they do, as a final thing, they do like a little improv Firefly episode, which is basically them just caricaturing themselves from the show.
That kind of reminds me of very recently they did a documentary on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and they interviewed a lot of the people who were part of the show, and as part of the documentary they got basically the entire creative team together in a room again and went, well, you know, let's assume you've got unlimited budget and you got renewed for another season. Like, how would you continue the show? And you kind of get to watch. I haven't actually seen it, but I've heard it's quite interesting. You get to watch this creative team kind of live draft a synopsis for like the season, a theoretical season premiere for an additional season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever actually watched footage from like any sort of writer's room or anything like that, but it's really interesting to watch stuff like that, like how quickly they just toss the ideas around and stuff.
Yeah, it's intimidating. I would never be able to do
Yeah,
that.
it is pretty intimidating, actually. Anyway, that was that. It was recorded in 2008, like I mentioned. So not too far away from Firefly in its prime / its only airing. No, I guess probably it's not its only airing, but it's... Yeah, actually, that's a good question. Did Firefly ever air after 2002?
I want to say no, at least in my research for this podcast. I've never run into any information that it aired again, but maybe I just don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, something to look up, I guess. Something to see if we can find.
I'll see if I can find something. I'll put it in the show notes if I can find any information on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is it... Oh, let's do some translations, I guess.
Were there any in this episode? I didn't notice any, but yeah.
There was one that I actually noticed in the background, which I thought was really interesting. Just a nice little world-building touch. When the life support goes off, there's like an alert that goes out over the PA system that says like, oh, life support failing, you know, check oxygen or something like that, and then it repeats the same thing in Chinese.
Yeah. I say as if
Interestingly,
whatever.
Interestingly, the wiki identifies that warning as specifically being Cantonese.
Well, the rest of I wonder. The rest of the show is Mandarin, right? Or maybe not. I don't know.
That's what that's what I thought. Like, that's what I had heard. Maybe I heard it from you. I don't know.
I don't know either. I feel like I just made that up on the spot, but who knows?
That's also the only translation I've seen on the wiki so far. And again, the wiki translations are taken from the Browncoats forum, but that's the only translation that I've seen so far explicitly being delineated as a specific. I'm completely blanking on the word I want to use. Dialect. There it is. A specific dialect.
Well, not only dialect, but like a completely. I guess the border is fuzzy, as it always is, but like it's pretty much a different language.
I'm not even going to pretend to know the linguistics of any language, actually.
The languages of China are like very varied, and some of them are not actually that closely related. They just share a writing system. So and because of the way the Chinese writing system works, like you can intelligibly read other languages even if you can't speak them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't even know too much about it either. Which is maybe sad, but but true.
I mean, I don't know. You majored in English, so...
I took enough linguistics classes for the minor. The only reason I didn't get the minor is because I neglected to sign up for it. Which is actually even more sad. That's the real sad thing.
Foiled by bureaucracy. Foiled by bureaucracy.
Yeah. Well, and neglect and laziness on my part, so...
Yeah, but like at the same time, it's so dumb that just because you didn't like sign up for it, they didn't go like, oh, you've like done everything you need for this minor, and just have you like sign a sheet of paper or something.
I guess.
Should we do America's 10 Actors? I only looked up one, and it was Steve Flynn who played the captain of the ship they tried to rob Mal. There weren't really that many guest actors in this episode anyway, to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. I actually didn't even remember to look anyone up until just right now, until you mentioned it, so I don't have anyone.
Well, it wasn't really anybody else to look up, I guess. But anyway, so he's still acting. He's going to be in the new Bosch spinoff on the Amazon TV show, but he was in NCIS LA, Better Call Saul, Jag, Lie to Me, Medium, Grey's Anatomy, which everybody seems to be in on this show, Numbers, CSI New York, X-Files, West Wing, ER, Hawaii Five-0, the TV movie based on the original series. And I want to say, because I thought I saw, no, maybe not. I thought I saw that he was in the reboot TV show, but actually, I guess not, because I'm looking now. That's not true. So, anyway, that's everything that I recognized him in. He was also in a TV series called Melrose Place, which I'm only mentioning because when I lived in South Africa, my house was on Melrose Avenue.
Huh.
I can say that because people will be like, oh man, gotta look up where Dylan lived in South Africa, but you can't. The house doesn't exist anymore. So.
No, really.
So we have an email again from Steven. Thanks for reaching out again, Steven. Subject Firefly Janestown. Hey guys, I kind of like the idea you mentioned about a Hallmark Christmas movie podcast. It gave me an excuse to watch. It would give me an excuse to watch one quote comfort food unquote Christmas movie every week of the year. I've long maintained that Christmas and Halloween should be year round anyway, so why not? I love me some good holiday cheer. Anyway, sorry my emails haven't been about Firefly itself. Holiday cheers, Steven. Well, Steven, I have good news for you. I discovered while writing the show notes for the Janestown episode that there actually is a Hallmark Christmas movie podcast. It's called Deck the Hallmark. I linked it in the show notes last week. I guess I'll link it in the show notes again this week for everybody who's curious. And yeah.
Yeah, but based on their description, they seem sort of a very facetious and ironic Hallmark podcast where their description was like 3 guys watch Hallmark movies. What could possibly go wrong? Or something like that.
That's, I think, pretty much exactly right. Good memory.
So, Stephen, maybe you could do a more genuine Hallmark podcast if you, enjoy Christmas movies yourself.
See, you say that, but Steven's email response to that is going to be, well, why don't you guys do a genuine Hallmark Christmas movie podcast?
Frankly, I don't think I would be capable of doing something like that, considering I, despise all holidays, with Christmas being at the top of that list.
Maybe that's what would make the podcast entertaining.
God.
The title of the podcast, Torture Keon with Christmas movies every week. The Christmas Torture Podcast. Okay. Thanks for reaching out again, Stephen. Like I said, I'll link that other podcast in the show notes if you want to check it out. If anybody else wants to check it out too, I guess. So yeah, I guess that wraps up Out of Gas. I guess we're out of gas for the episode.
Wow.
Hardy. If you'd like to email us, you can reach us at thedoctor@decadentvegetable.com. Questions, comments, and concerns, angry rants, love letters, your thoughts on Out of Gas. You can find us on YouTube at Decadent Vegetable. You can find us on anywhere you find podcasts at Inevitable, a classic sci-fi podcast. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show.
Check us out on Facebook. Trust Your Doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us out on Twitter at TYD Podcast and follow us on Twitter. Next time we're going to be watching Ariel. But until then, the end.